This is Elizabeth Creamer coming to you from Blacksburg, Virginia, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how thinking has advanced about the use of joint displays and mixed methods. This is coming from my work in a book I've recently completed called Visual Displays in Qualitative and Mixed Methods Research, which will be coming out probably in August from Routledge. So let's think very briefly about what is the definition of a joint display. This is language that just came into the mixed methods terminology system in about 2008. And a joint display is simply conceived as any kind of visual display that juxtaposes generally qualitative and quantitative data from different sources to examine or identify or locate patterns within it. The big advantage of a joint display, like a spreadsheet, is it allows you to move back and forth between different sources of data to see patterns. Even in the simple little cluster map I've got up there, you can begin to see things that are related and not related. Let me quickly summarize some of my purposes in doing this presentation in the video format. First and foremost, I want to promote creative uses of joint displays, creative adaptations of joint displays for use in your own research, to avoid the thinking that they come in one format. And this has sort of been a theme of all my work in mixed methods, to say there are many right ways to do mixed methods. And you adapt it to your own circumstances and your own interest in the types of data you collect. I want to point to some key developments in the thinking about joint display as I understand it, those that have been the most visible. So I do that in 5 different steps. And I want to point to some of the most cutting edge uses that have been developed just in the last few years, and this is all fairly recent, by the way. And then I want to end by recognizing some references that would be useful to you should you choose to develop an expertise in joint displays. So in my book, I explore different types of joint displays and try to make the point that they serve many different purposes. They've been conceived fairly narrowly, but they actually serve different purposes. I have a website on joint displays, and one of the infographics lists, I think, a dozen or half a dozen different purposes that can be served by a joint display. So let's delve into this idea of the evolution of joint displays. If you think about the literature about mixed methods, it really began to emerge in the early 2000s, 88 to 98 to the early 2000s. The literature was beginning to appear. The language of joint displays did not really come into accepted terminology until this sort of landmark piece that Creswell and Plano Clark identified in their 2008 edition of their textbook about mixed methods. And this is a very simple, straightforward, side-by-side display from a group that was studying depression and doctors by Wintic, Barg, and Gallo. And this is a widely recognized piece, and I remember when I first saw it, it was like, wow, of course this is great, because the alignment generates an additional level of insight. So this is recognized as one of the very first joint displays or tables to actually be called a joint display. If we stay going in chronological order, although this is really a fairly advanced joint display, the second display that I would point out to you in the evolution of thinking about joint displays is really quite a dramatic advance in that it is using what is called a radial multi-layered format, and this is by Carol Bustamante. At the center is core constructs, and then you're building knowledge from different sources of data and building it out. So rather than the left to right thinking that is characteristic of joint displays, at least in the United States, this is almost like exploding from the center in multi-layered. So this also received a good deal of attention in the mixed methods world as a new way of conceiving of a joint display in a circular format. At about the same time, or the same year as Bustamante, also in the Journal of Mixed Methods, a group of scholars led by Johnson introduced a new term to apply to joint displays by inserting a central column in a joint display, which they refer to as pillar integration. And this is language that others have adopted. So what's unusual about this joint display for the time is it introduced the idea of generating a set of themes by looking at qualitative and quantitative data on the same construct and generating a set of themes. Those are called blended themes or mixed themes, and others have used this concept. Moving forward in time of 5 years, we see the addition in joint displays of adding graphs. This is still a left to right format. You've still got quantitative data in one column and qualitative data in another. But this was an idea introduced by Haynes Brown and Fetters from Haynes Brown dissertation, where she was working with observations of teachers. We talked earlier, or I introduced earlier, a concept that Johnson et al. Called pillar integration. And I noted that one of the things that was unusual or innovative about that figure, that table, was the introduction of the idea that you could generate themes. Now, up to that point in the history of the development of joint displays, the idea was, the practice was, that's it, you stop there. That's an inference, a theme is an inference, you don't take it further. Well, the most recent and innovative examples coming out of literally 21, 22, 23 are using, first of all, not just one display, but multiple displays, and generating insight by comparing what's learned from more than one joint display. Multiple displays. So this is a table from my book showing 2 ways that has been done in practice already and listing some examples. So one way is essentially the idea of you take pillar integration, center column, the big blue circle, you generate themes, and then you pursue that theme through more joint displays. You create a joint display for each theme to try and use it to guide further analysis. So that's the example on the left. And Poff has an example of that from 2018. The reverse is also true that Peters did, and this is also very, very innovative. Took the findings or themes generated from several joint displays and then integrated them into a final display. So 2 ways to do it. You start with a meta display, and then you break it down and pursue the themes, or you integrate the themes in a meta-analytic display. So my final example is from Peters, 2021. And this is the example where there's a series of joint displays produced first, and then they are merged into a meta-analytic display. I have never seen this done by anyone else but Peters. So here you see one of the joint displays he used to create the meta display. And you see he's picked up the language of pillar integration. He's got his quantitative data on the left, the qualitative codes on the right. He's generated themes from them, and then each of those themes went in to a final integrative table. Notice how he's picking up on that language from Johnson. And you'll see in the next picture that he picks up on some work, the work by Bustamante in his final figure. So this is Peter et al.'s final meta-analytic circle in meta-analytic joint display in the form of a circle. And he said he got the idea from Bustamante. So this is a multi-layered figure. Each layer represents a different joint display and what is learned about the construct from the different joint displays. At the center is his core construct. So this is building knowledge from the center out through a circular display. What's extraordinary about it is that it's the example that is using the layers each represent knowledge from a different joint display. So let's wrap up with just two more slides. This first one, let me summarize the evolution. So joint displays were first conceived as side-by-side, left to right orientation, align your data, don't take it too much further, it's an endpoint. The evolution is to use them to generate, as we first saw in the pillar integration, to use them as an analytical tool. So what is produced is a result, not an inference. So it's a tool to advance analysis, to advance insight. I've talked about the advantage of that in terms of multidimensional thinking. So the tables have become more complex, less likely to be entirely self-explanatory. They promote thinking not only left to right, but sometimes circular, sometimes spiral. So this is significantly more complex. I found in writing my book that there are many different shapes that have been used, and that the shape of the joint display can influence totally the type of insight that's generated. And I'll be doing more videos on that. So the most important advance is using them as an analytical tool, and then they become the centerpiece of the results section. So these are results, you're producing results. It's a very exciting, dynamic field, or element of the field, and like most knowledge, it's incremental, it builds. So someone sees an example and they adapt an example. And this is a case where practice is really driving the understanding of them. So you see it in practice first, and then the methodological literature catches up. I wanted to end by providing a brief reference list. One advantage of the topic of joint displays, should you choose to become more expert in it, is that the literature is fairly limited, and that makes it easier to consume. So I've given you a few examples here of the recent literature about the use of joint displays in mixed methods research. I've done thinking about how to expand this into qualitative research and not just restrict it to qual and quant data. That's one of the many frontiers available in this topic of joint displays.